Alert Media.
Hello, my fellow Dreadites. Welcome back to the Dread Alert podcast. Today, I'm joined by Shirley Jackson Award-winning author Scott Thomas. I'm thrilled to have Scott with us here today. Scott has written a number of novels, and today we're going to be talking about his most recent, which is Midwestern Gothic. I had the chance to read this, and I really quite enjoyed it. His other novels include Kill Creek and Violet. He's also a showrunner for Disney and Sci-Fi with shows like The Wizards Beyond Waverly Place and Day of the Dead and R.L. Stine's Haunting Hour and Raven's Home. You are a busy guy, so I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to join us here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, first and foremost, let me embarrass you by gushing about how much I enjoyed Midwestern Gothic. I think it is full of vivid and rich and complex prose while still being extremely digestible. And what really struck me is it has such a strong sense of location and really compelling and challenging characters at some point. These characters are not perfect people, and you are asked to go on this ride with them. And I found it to just be a very gratifying experience.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Kansas, a really small town of about 9,000 people, and right on the border of Oklahoma. And so when I write about Kansas, I set Kill Creek in Kansas because Kill Creek, the actual area, is in. I mean, there are several states have Kill Creeks, but Kansas does, and then I just kept writing about it. And I think I've been in LA since 1998, but I just still write about Kansas and that kind of small town rural um, life. And then, because it just felt like not a lot of people were setting horror stories there. So it
Yeah.
seemed like a good enough place to set a lot of my stories.
What attracted me to the title is I'm from Pittsburgh, and so we're like right on the edge of Midwest. If you ask somebody who's from LA, they'll tell you we are Midwest. If you ask somebody from Pittsburgh, we're Rust Belt proud. But we spent a lot of time in Ohio, and my dad's family was from small town West Virginia. So that Appalachian Midwest kind of vibe is something I have an interest in terms of the folklore and the bones of it. This is definitely, true Midwest. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, about these four novellas that make up Midwestern Gothic?
Yeah. Well, it's it started with one novella, and I was actually up in Vancouver, um, and I was running a show that was very loosely based on Day of the Dead for Sci-Fi, and it was a zombie thing. And I was up there, and we were shooting during the pandemic, so it was things had just kind of opened up. They were more open in Canada than they were here. But I was stuck up there for 5 months and I couldn't come home. My family couldn't come up and see me. So I ended up writing this novella called The Boy in the Woods. And and that really kind of originated with just an idea of trying to flip kind of the 80s slasher on its head a little bit. Instead of the counselors being the victims, the counselors are the threat, and the young boy who is at the camp has to defend himself. Um, and uh, that one was kind of standalone for a minute. And then I just, when actually I got back to LA and I was working on the sort of, everything opened back up. I was working on a Disney show called Wizards Beyond Waverly Place. Well, actually, we were just getting ready, sort of gearing up to start that show. And then the writer's strike happened. And so I had a lot of time on my hands. And so I decided I have this one novella. What if I just wrote three more? And at first, it was going to be a novella and a collection of short stories because I have been working in kids and family television for quite a while. And so, which means that uh, I'm sitting on a lot of horror ideas because I love horror. It's my absolute favorite genre. It's really kind of what I've always written and what I came out to LA to do, and sort of accidentally got into kids and family. But so I was like, it's going to be the novella Boy in the Woods, and then it will be a bunch of short stories. Well, of course, the next short story I started writing ended up being another novella. And that was another one that's in the book. It's called The Door in the Field, and that one was an idea that I had had for a while, which was it's a little bit like a rural Collateral with a serial killer. It's kind of a guy who is on, ends up going out with the wrong person one night and kind of ends up on a ride through hell until dawn. And uh, and then that one I set in Kansas as well. And then while I was up in Vancouver, I got the idea for the one of the other novellas in the collection, which is called One Half of a Child's Face, and which that one is about a woman who is copy editing a book. She is at home and she's recently divorced. Her ex-husband and his new girlfriend happen to live in an apartment building down the hill from her. So from her back porch, she can see the apartment building where they live, and their daughter, who they share custody of, is with her dad and this girlfriend for this weekend. And then as this woman is watching this apartment building and making up stories about everyone who lives there, she starts to see strange things happening in this apartment, and it seems to lead to a seemingly empty apartment up in the corner that has a strange painting that looks like one half of a child's face hanging on the wall. Uh, and then, so I had those three novellas, and I had sort of mentioned the authors from Kill Creek, my first book, in these other novellas. I sort of was having fun expanding my own universe and letting them live in that same universe with the authors from Kill Creek. But there was one I hadn't really mentioned. And so I was talking to my publisher and Adam Gomlin at Inkshares, and he was like, "What if you wrote a fourth one and included T.C. Moore from Kill Creek?" And the problem was I didn't really have an idea for a fourth novella, but I did have a germ of an idea for a story that I wanted to tell. And so that became the fourth novella in the book, which is called Wear Your Secret Like a Stone. And that one is about a young woman who works at a big box store, kind of like Walmart. She's asked by her boss and the other employees there are asked to pick a scary movie or a scary book or something to put on their Halloween display at the front of the store. She picks a book by the author T.C. Moore from Kill Creek. Moore's very much kind of a female Clive Barker and writes very sort of explicit, like violent, sexual horror stories. And so she picks this book, they put it on the display, and then someone comes in and complains about it, and she's called into her boss's office and they say, you have to pick a different book. Like they were getting complaint that we got to complain about this book. And instead of picking another book, she decides, I'm going to find out who complained about it. And then by kind of going down this rabbit hole, she ends up uncovering a dark secret about her hometown that actually hits pretty close to home for her. Uh, and so those are the four novellas. And what they ended up all sort of the theme that they ended up sharing, and I think one of the reasons that I called it Midwestern Gothic was I, since Kill Creek, have really thought about my own interpretation. It might not be the scholarly interpretation or the right one, but my own interpretation of Gothic and Gothic horror, thinking of sort of classic British Gothic and how it sort of originates with crumbling castles and the atrocities that happened centuries ago in these castles. And now today, whoever is going to this castle is sort of having to face the evil that resides in these places because of the original atrocities. When you think of sort of New England Gothic, it's a little more it's the houses of the rich, turn of the 20th century industrial revolution, kind of robber baron sort of these if you think about like Hell House or anything like that, it's a little more recent, but it is again, it's about sort of the wealthy and the awful things that these wealthy people do, and then uh the you know the evil that is festered in these places. And Southern Gothic is very sort of centered around obviously plantations and things like that, where it's obvious, very clear what the horrors that happened there were. And so I started thinking, what is Midwestern Gothic? What is the sort of place that Midwestern Gothic resides? And I decided to focus on the land because the land is the thing that everyone came out for, that they killed for, that they committed atrocities for, that they ran people off of, that they stole. And what does that mean for future generations who are now living on that land and maybe don't think they don't have a connection to those atrocities? And some of the stories are a little more on the nose than others, but it is that's the root of the evil in each story is you can't really own land. And if you think you can own land, you're kidding yourself. And if you take over the land, you owned the things that happen there. So if bad things happen there, they are now yours, and now you have to deal with them. And so that became thematically a bit of a thread that ran through all four stories.
Yeah, I think that was a really clear thread and a very clear sense of guilt that permeates this, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And you speak about it beautifully diegetically within these stories. The characters speak about this. Another thing I think these stories do incredibly well, and I want to quote Anne Radcliffe here because we're talking about Gothic literature. She talks about terror versus horror, and she says they're opposites. The terror expands the soul and awakens the faculties to a high degree of life, and the other, horror, freezes and nearly annihilates the soul. And I think that's a really interesting contrast because I think you do both extremely well in this. Um, when you were plotting these, did you find that you had to spend an extra, was there extra effort given to the slow burn terror here, or did you know where you were heading and just wanted to make that hammer drop as hard as possible by plotting it to be a little bit more terror filled and slow burn? That's a weird question, I know.
No, I get it. I think that like my style is pretty slow burn. And that's just because that's how I enjoy writing. I really love exploring a story. I will always know the basic plot points of the story that I'm about to write, but I don't always know everything in between. And to me, that's the exciting thing about writing is the exploration and the discovery. And so I already kind of tend to write, and I personally really enjoy slow burn stories. I like stories that immerse you in atmosphere and take their time, and sort of before you know it, they have their claws in you, and you didn't even realize it. And it's not to say I don't love, stories that are just fast and violent and in your face and really visceral. But I tend to, when I write, um, I tend to explore a lot, and so in writing these, I really had a good time exploring the locations and the characters and letting that sort of horror build. And I think if anything, it's sort of like the buildup of horror that kind of leads to the terror. It's that sense of dread that, and then eventually you're in it, you can't get out, and now you have to face and try to survive the thing that you've allowed yourself to be lured by. But um, yeah, it's just, I think it's just kind of my style is much more atmospheric and slow burn.
Absolutely. And speaking of your style and your process, I'm curious how you were able to create such wonderfully complex characters who challenge your sense of empathy. We have a sub-editorial channel where we talk a lot about empathy in horror, which, goes cross gender, it goes cross age. You're asked to put yourself in situations that you'll never be in and go on a ride with a character who's completely unlike you. These characters, these protagonists, are challenging people. I think of Ray specifically. There's a lot that I'm asked to empathize with, which is outside of my experience. Do you have an approach to that that you can share with us?
I think I usually try to start from a place that I can identify with, which, I think we're all complicated people, whether we want to admit it or not. We all have our demons. We all have our things that we struggle with. And so I think I usually try to, with a character, I try to either start with a character trait that I myself can identify with that maybe comes from me, or things that I've struggled with, or with things that I've people close to me have. So with Ray in The Door in the Field, it actually came from an experience, a childhood friend who had was just the sweetest person, absolute most innocent, sweetest person in the world, and then was in a car accident and had head trauma, and then became the exact opposite. And just not to say that she wasn't a sweet, wonderful person, but it really did change her. She was sort of you know a very the opposite of what we had known. And for me, it was when I thought about that, especially for Ray, the character, I started to think, and I think this is how it spoke universally and to me, was that who Ray was always supposed to be? Was the person that Ray was before the accident uh actually kind of a mask? The real Ray was hiding under this, or is the real Ray the one before the accident, and real Ray's gone, and now this is just post-accident Ray, and there's kind of no recapturing that. And the that's the struggle ultimately the Ray has to face with himself, is, am I a good person who can do bad things, or am I a bad person who maybe in the face of a worse person can do something good? And so, I think with Tara from Wear Your Secret Like a Stone, I really liked the idea that she's a little more like, she's in her early 20s. She loves horror. She doesn't apologize for that, or apologize for the horror she likes. But she's also she has a lot of faith. She's raised Christian, and she has, so I sort of liked exploring that. What does that mean to sort of have this faith and believe in God and in the Bible, but also like these awful horror stories? Which and sort of the struggle of her living in this really small uh town, Midwestern town. There's a feeling of, I want to get out, but I also want to be loyal to this town. It can only get better if people stay there, and they make it better, but also I want to get out. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the the struggle that she's going through, which I could completely relate to, because I left my hometown after high school. I went to University of Kansas, and then once I was done there, I was just ready to go to LA and like go to a city and sort of live somewhere bigger. But in living here, I found myself constantly thinking about my hometown, and I see I have friends who still live there, and I see, the struggles that a small town goes through in trying to sort of, survive. And so that was definitely a character trait a personal, sort of character trait that I could put into her. So I think I always kind of go, what's something I can identify with, and then what is something that maybe twists that personality a little bit so that it's more interesting, so that there's a bit of a dichotomy there. There's something to kind of explore
Mm.
in an internal struggle, in these characters.
I always like hearing that kind of an answer, especially when I talk to actors. My background is my degree was in theater, and so I was an actor and a director and a producer for decades. Um, but that's the way I approached character work, was what is my way in, and then building up the circumstances around that. So it's always so gratifying when an author is approaching the material the same way, because what is a performer doing but reverse engineering your process as a writer. Um, yeah, really interesting stuff. And I found Tara to be incredibly compelling, not only because of maybe some things in her past which she has some guilt over, which may or may not be her
Hmm.
responsibility or her fault. But oddly enough, the inciting incident of that short story that you mentioned before was that a big box store asks their employees to select their recommendations for their customers to make it feel more at home. And I have to admit that I found out about you as a writer because my local Barnes and Noble was highlighting Kill Creek, and so it was just that was my way into this story. And even things like I was bit by a dog. My scars have healed up very well, but I was bit by a dog when I was 2.5 years old. I have a strained relationship with my father. Each of these novellas have such a human core, and I related to at least a major character, if not the protagonist, in every single one with something just extremely lived in. So it was really, really well done. And
Thank you.
I I have to ask, you've written three horror novels. You've written Kill Creek, you've written Violet, and you've written Midwestern Gothic. And I will honestly admit to you that Violet is at the top of my to be read list, and I've not read that one yet, so I'm excited to dig in. But I have to ask, you said earlier in our conversation that you've always loved horror. Is there something specific that drew you to the genre? I always love finding out what other horror fans get from it because, there's so much. It's such a big tent of satisfaction, let's say. So I wondered what drew you to the genre.
I can't say. I have, as long as I can remember, I've loved it. I think it really started with, for whatever reason, a love of scary stories, of ghost stories, um, and the supernatural. When I would go to my public library, there was always the adult side and the kid side, and I would go over to the kid side and I would find the section that had all of the like books on monsters and UFOs and ghosts, and I would just eat it up. And whenever we had our scholastic book fair at the school, I would buy every single little paperback about ghosts or Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or UFOs or anything. I just really, I think it's in the same way that some people just like roller coasters, and the first time they go on one, they go, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I just love scary stories, and it does kind of give me that thrill. There's this sense of that some people hate, and I understand. There's this sense of am I it's a fun chill. It's a sense of excitement, of sort of adrenaline, that, and then it's also this sense that, is there something more out there? Is there this weird world beyond this thin veil around us, that these strange things are happening, and they really are, and I think that fascinated me. I always loved, um when I was little, I grew up in the 80s, and we would get up on Saturday mornings and at like 6 o'clock start watching cartoons, and at that point there were three networks, and so you would watch CBS, NBC, and ABC, and you'd watch all of their cartoons until noon. And it was every Saturday morning was amazing. You'd watch the Smurfs, and you'd watch Pac-Man, and you'd watch, and so, and they always had a story break special, and it was like a little like half hour or hour long live action kind of short based on a story. And I don't know what this one was supposedly based on, but there was one called Riddle of the Red Room, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense, but it creeped me out. It was like this boy is walking home and he meets this boy at the house next door who says he just moved in, and then he invites him over, and it just gets weird. And it's like, I don't remember even making sense back in the day, but it was just scary. And so when I kind of started writing my own stories, I still have it somewhere around here. I should have gotten it out. It's probably right behind this curtain in a box. All of my crap is back here. I'm in the garage. But the it's when I was in first grade, I drew a picture of a cruise ship, and I wrote in crayon this little detective story about a detective who finds a dead body on the cruise ship, and then has to kill the murderer. And and I just my teachers were like, "This is great. You should keep writing." They didn't send me to the counselor or anything. They just said, "Yeah, keep writing." And so I just kept writing kind of weird, scary stories, and eventually ghost stories. And then in junior high and high school, kept writing, and a lot of scary short stories. And I don't know. I read a lot of Stephen King growing up. I read a lot of Anne Rice and Clive Barker and Edgar Allan Poe. And every birthday, my birthday's in December, but every birthday I would have a ghost or a haunted house on my cake. I didn't have superheroes or anything. I had something scary, the Loch Ness Monster or something like that. I just always really liked these stories of otherworldly things, and I think it is a little bit, uh, just that excitement that of hearing a story that you're safe, there isn't someone actually in the house with you, but it sort of chills you and it's exciting, you know.
Yeah. We hear from our audience a lot that that controlled fear actually helps them with their anxiety. Not only gives them that thrill, but helps them manage fear outside of horror as well. And I think there's something to be said for the rite of passage as a young person encountering horror. My wife runs a side channel where she does recommendations for ages of birth to 17 with spooky content. So probably a lot of the shows that you've worked on with the young adult entertainment, if they lean spooky, she's probably covered them. But I think there's a rite of passage that leaves a lasting impression on your psyche, and some of us don't break away from that. We have a 2-year-old. She'll be 2 in November, and she loves Nightmare Before Christmas. And I'm just watching her on the same trajectory that I was on as a youngster, being a spooky baby. It's
The funny thing is,
very
I have two daughters who are now in high school, and one of them does really like watching horror movies with me, and we watch a lot of horror movies, but like the other one, just like somewhere around middle school, was like, I don't like this. It stresses me out. I have enough stress in my life. I don't like this feeling. And I think you're right in that for some, for us who do love it, it is cathartic in some way. But I've thought about it a lot, and obviously we all sort of think about it and get asked that question, like, why do we like these things, especially by people who don't like them? Like, how can you like that? Oh, it's awful. And I I think it is cathartic. It is a sort of a journey you go through where you face the monster and you see someone face the monster. And even if the monster shows up again in the last, 30 seconds to set up a sequel, you at least saw someone from beginning to end go through a fight with this evil, whereas all of us get up every day and look at our phones and the bad news never ends. And so to have that the conclusion to that and see someone actually sort of go to the end of fighting this thing and seemingly stop it. There is something, very cathartic about that. But I also think that it's also a little bit about not, I think, for a lot of us not feeling alone. I've always, struggled with anxiety and depression. And I think that when you are a sensitive person and you sort of struggle with those things and you feel like, God, is everyone else freaking happy? Because I'm not. And then you sort of get to read these stories that kind of are how you feel inside sometimes. And they're scary
yeah.
and they're dark and people are going through things and everything isn't okay. And I think there's almost something comforting in feeling like the author gets me, the other readers of this get me, and I'm not alone.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we cover a lot of movies on the channel, and people are probably sick of hearing me say that we are the outcasts alone together in the dark of the cinema. And that's what unites us as a community.
Hmm.
We care about these books deeply. We care about the genre deeply. We care about each other deeply. But, oftentimes we do feel alone out there. That is so well said. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Um, so these novellas reference your other work, as you mentioned, but they're four independent stories in topic
Hmm.
as well as in tone. Outside of the location, and maybe you already talked a little bit about this with the land, but I'm interested in hearing if there's any more. Is there anything that unites these four stories outside of the location, thematically or structurally, whatever you might think unites these four stories?
I mean, I do think each one is about kind of a lone character having to go through a night of hell. They are kind of about um, individuals who are facing something, a personal struggle, and then having to face either a human threat or a supernatural threat. And
or both in some stories.
yeah, absolutely both. There's a definitely some cosmic horror and folk horror that go into these stories that sort of unite them, even in Boy in the Woods, which is probably the most, in some ways, the most grounded, literal, kind of straightforward, um, not necessarily supernatural story, but where the origin of this sort of evil that's spreading throughout this summer camp does come from kind of a strange folk horror, you know, maybe cosmic. It sort of starts with this animal that shouldn't exist here, and so it's a little bit. I think that if you're a fan of folk horror and cosmic horror, if you're a fan of sort of like you know, stories about sort of a character going down a rabbit hole and and then having to fight their way back out. That's a little bit of, I think, what connects all of them. They're all, every single story is kind of like, if you just hadn't gone there, you never would have gone through this. It's not like the threat came to them and the aliens came and I had no choice but to fight. Everyone in this story, kind of, with the exception of maybe Eddie in Boy in the Woods, who's sort of stuck at camp for one more night. Everyone else sort of has a decision to either, do I keep snooping or do I just look the other way and not go through this awful experience? And they all
Yeah.
just can't help snooping. And so they follow the trail and they end up in a pretty awful place.
It's that small town nosiness, you know?
It is. It's like no one can mind their own business. Everyone's a
Right?
gossip.
So were there any scenes, and by the way, brilliant answer. That was sort of a trick question because these are four distinct stories. I didn't mean to trick you. I just wondered if there was
No, I
anything you
honestly have
had.
never really thought about it. I just kind of realized that it is sort of, every story is there's sort of one main character and they are um you know, they're all kind of facing their individual demons.
Hmm. It was selfish of me because I just to ask that because I wanted to know from the author if there was a connective thread that you saw. Because thematically, I will agree that it feels like land stolen and squandered is the main connective tissue of this. The guilt that we have over what we've done, and the specifically the fallout from that is that we didn't allow ourselves to do anything better than strip malls with that
Hmm.
land. But I just had to ask you personally, out of personal curiosity, what the other connective tissue you might see is, because your novels are all very much so of a world, you know, of a. I can see, and this is in no way saying that it's derivative, but I can see the influence that King might have had on
Absolutely.
you as a young author or a young reader, I should say.
Well, and that was very eye-opening for me. I think both everything Stephen King wrote and then also Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes
Mm.
were really made me made they those were the kind of the first stories where you went, oh man, this could be happening in my backyard. This is basically small town horror. This is, you know, just an average town, average small town, and then this horror comes in and infiltrates it and corrupts the people. And there was something really exciting about that I wasn't reading about, you know, a far off land or somewhere on the East Coast or somewhere in England or you know, I was reading about even though King was Maine, it felt very much like my small town. And
Hmm.
you know, I think a small town anywhere is a small town. And so that was kind of the first time that I had been exposed to that. And it was a huge influence. And I even the movie based on Something Wicked This Way Comes, I watched that multiple times when I was a kid, and I just loved it. And there was just this sense of, you could just be in your home, your little small town, and a carnival comes in, a train pulls in, and a carnival's suddenly there, and now there's evil in your town.
Yeah.
and kids
I
are
think
the only ones who can stop it. There was just something that was sort of when you talk about like Goonies and it's an adventure in your own backyard horror, those horror stories were like it's horror in my own backyard, and I really liked that.
I think there's something that grounds it in reality that makes it a little scarier when it feels so specific and so local. And I don't know. I'm a giant slasher fan. I love the fantastic elements. I love, that kind of horror, but I also really I'm a David Lynch fan at heart. And so
I
like
love David
the
Lynch.
yeah, right? That blue velvet
Yep.
underbelly, it can
And that's
happen
the
here.
thing, Blue Velvet, you find an ear in a field, and all you have to do is not ask questions. You just go,
Right?
yeah, I'll just call the cops. They can deal with the ear. But he can't, he
Yeah.
has to follow this. And that's obviously Blue Velvet stories like that are, I think, very also another kind of the connective tissue of Midwestern Gothic. It really is.
Mm,
I've always loved those stories of just the character who just has to find the answer. They can't stop looking into it, whereas everybody else is just turning a blind eye to it. Don't worry about it. And
yeah.
I think,
I,
on a bigger scale, I think that's the scary thing about the world is that very few people anymore are going, hey, but let's look into this.
yeah,
You know,
100%.
everyone else is
Totally
going,
agree.
just don't worry about it. Turn a blind eye.
Hey, do you guys hear about TikTok? This is great. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
we're not
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we're not engaging. That's very, very astute. To change gears a bit, I wonder, were there any scenes in any of these four novellas that you really looked forward to writing, that you were driving that train towards I can't wait to get typing on this one?
Um, you know, in one half of a child's face, I was really looking forward to getting in that apartment, and
Mm,
sort of like really kind of like exploring what was happening in there and letting her find out the weirdness that was going on because up until that point it's very rear window. She's just watching it from her back porch and looking at these apartment windows and kind of making up what she thinks is going on there. And then as weird things start to happen and she starts to worry about her daughter who was in that apartment with her ex-husband and his girlfriend, uh it getting her finally letting her get in there was felt freeing. I was like, okay, now we're in, this whole story we've been out. um I think for me, actually, for the funny thing with Door in the Field, I was really excited to get to sort of the postscript of that story, which is there's a bit of a, a, a framing story that starts with the daughter of the main character and how he abandoned her and has never and her mother and has never been in her life and she doesn't understand why, and then she finds out who he is and she goes to confront him and then he tells her this whole horrible story that explains why he to an extent explains why he ran off. And I was sort of excited to get back to her because I didn't just like her, I didn't totally agree with that reasoning. As a
yeah,
father, you sort of have this instinct of I will die for these kids and I
yeah.
will protect them to the death. And as a mother, as a parent, you feel this. And so I was kind of excited to get back to her
I'll
after the whole story was done.
I'll say I'm glad you mentioned both of those because something that I'm particularly interested in right now with a toddler and one due in December. Not I'm my wife is due in December. I'm not, but
Yeah.
she's doing the hard work. Is parental horror in both directions, and they're different animals, but like same animal, different species, I guess. That was very cathartic with having a strained relationship with my father. That was so cathartic for me that last conversation. And anything to do with protecting your kids just immediately unnerves me. And I'm sure that's, we write about what we're afraid of, what we're afraid of. We watch what we're afraid of. So I'm sure that is close to your heart as well. But yeah, I really appreciated the parental horror in both of those stories.
And
I'm
that
glad.
that also it does kind of again, I'm just sort of realizing this because sometimes when you write these things, you don't intend to have a theme there, and then you see some connective tissue. But there is also a bit of a generational horror that goes into these stories, whereas and plays into the theme of the generations that have lived on this land, and this is the most recent generation who's now kind of having to pay for the sins of their fathers and having to face what their parents wouldn't.
Mm,
And it, with the exception of Boy in the Woods, the other three really are kind of, what are we doing to our kids, and what world are
yeah.
we leaving them? And is is it the whole point, I think, as a parent, is you want them to be better than you. You want them to be even more open-minded and even more adventurous, and you want them to sort of, all the hangups you had, you try to, like, don't give that to them, and the things that you wish your parents hadn't given you, you sort of go, I'm not going to do that to my kids. And
Yep.
in some of these stories in this book, they do. They have,
Yeah.
it's the kids who finally or in the case of One Half the Child's Face, the main character, who's the mother of this girl, and is watching all these other families and how they're sort of like turning their kids into, they're either ignoring them or they're turning them into clones of themselves, and she's like, all I want to do is be with my daughter, and who's with my ex-husband, and so it is a bit of, how do we break that cycle? How do we sort of make them better than us, and hopefully leave them a better world? But at the same time, like you pointed out, what are we doing with this land? We're building buildings
Yeah.
that are going to fall down in 50 years because they're poorly constructed. There's no architecture to them. They're just stores. They're just, here's a Starbucks and here's a CVS and here's another CVS and here's another Starbucks. And they're, at the end of the day, this thing we thought was so valuable, what are we doing with it?
Yeah. Robbing the design of a building, a fast food chain to make it more able to be sold after that they're done harvesting the people around it, like taking all the
Yeah.
personality out of the designs, and
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
you're hitting the nail on the head there. Even Tara has some generation. I mean, clearly has some generational trauma, but
Yeah.
I think of the Boy in the Woods, and the parents are delayed. They leave him there.
Yeah,
They could
they
have,
don't seem to care. And that's I guess
yeah.
that is also, they have just sort of gone, oops, we can't make it. We got the date wrong. You have to spend another night at camp.
I can't imagine that. First of all,
Yeah.
that was horrifying to me having gone to camp. I would be so traumatized. But
Oh, yeah.
on the flip side, as a parent, I can't imagine it.
No,
Um, I just really quickly, I know we're almost at time here. I have to ask, what is your favorite of the four? Can you pick one of them? Can you? It's a Sophie's choice, I'm sure, but do you have a favorite?
it is. I really like things about all of them. I will say that I think uh for me, Wear Your Secret Like a Stone was really, was kind of, to me, it was the most exciting because I actually did not know what that story was when I started writing it. The All the other ones I knew, I almost always know exactly where a story is going to end. Sometimes I know the exact last line that I'm working towards, and when I write that last line, I feel like I stuck the landing. It's a very good feeling. With Wear Your Secret Like a Stone, it was the last one I wrote, and I had some ideas. I had this idea of a story about a hunger stone, and I had this idea about really kind of writing a shadow version of my hometown, which, just a little, it might be in the afterword, but um, my hometown is called Coffeeville, and when it was sort of back in the 1800s, there was a guy named Coffee and a guy named Blanton, and they flipped a coin to decide who got to name it, and Coffee won, and that's why it's called Coffeeville. So in this story, Blanton won. So it's kind of like this fictitious version of who was that guy, and what if he was maybe into some weird occult stuff, and maybe he was not a great guy, and now this town, he sort of is named after him, and it's a little bit of a cursed town. So I think that story was really fun because it was a story of discovery for me as much as it is the reader. Um,
Hmm.
I ultimately knew where it was going, but as I was writing it, I was just kind of having fun living in this small town and going, who did complain about her book and why didn't they want it there? And so that was one that I sort of had fun. It was a bit of a detective story for myself.
Hmm. I would honestly be hard pressed to choose a favorite of these four. I really liked them all quite a bit, but that might be my favorite only because there's an element of surreal. It's the discovery that and what she's discovering is more surreal at every turn. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it
I
gets
really
weirder
enjoyed
and
that.
weirder.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, so these are some questions or some variations on questions we ask all of our guests, and two of them are personalized for you, and one of them is just one that I like to ask. So there are a lot of music references in in these novellas, including references to some music that I grew up with, and my favorite band Ghost was name dropped. So I have to
Yeah.
ask, what kind of music are you into? If you want to give me a short rundown.
I love a lot of like kind of across the board, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I really love sort of 80s post-punk. I love like The Cure, and I love Echo and the Bunnymen, and I love New Order and Joy Division and Bauhaus and all that. And I also love 80s hair metal. One of the first concerts I went and saw Winger, and then I saw Motley Crue, and I saw Warrant, and I saw Poison. And so I really kind of grew up, and when I got Appetite for Destruction, it was just like mind blowing. That was the first album I remember buying on tape, and I was just like, this is something special. This is amazing. Then, of course, got really into grunge in the early 90s. And so I still, love when Ray is thinking about his girlfriend, Angel, and sort of her guitar and all the stickers on her guitar, they're very 90s. And it's a story that's set in the 90s. And so, there's a Screaming Trees sticker on there. And I'm just like,
Yes.
I still listen to that. And uh, I love Nine Inch Nails. I love, uh, I really like sort of moodier, darker music, and obviously, that's why like I reference Ghost and you know bands like that that are a little newer but kind of still live in that really kind of creepy. I like things are operatic, It's just like it's fun when sort of rock like Queensryche or like Iron Maiden, just gets so operatic.
Yes. Absolutely. We share a lot of the same tastes, and I just want to shout out Jane's Addiction and Veruca Salt of all
Yeah,
people. I saw them open for Bush in like 1997 or something. It was
yeah.
awesome. I was like, yes, I was so pumped. But it was like a laundry list of my favorite bands. I had to ask. Do you have a favorite ghost story novel or gothic novel? I'm gonna give you a wider palette to paint with here and lump those two subgenres
hmm
together, although they're not identical.
No, I think I I really like Ghost Story by Peter Straub. I think that does sort of play into I think that's a gothic novel. It's very much about a secret that these men share that a crime they committed when they were younger, and now it's back and they're kind of paying the price for it. It's also a very again it's in also in a Stephen King way. It's very much about an evil that's kind of infecting a town, and um, I. I'm trying to think. I had never read The House Next Door until in Dance Macabre, Stephen King mentions it and talks about it, and so I finally read that a few years ago, and that was amazing. It's if you've
I'm
never
gonna
read it,
I've not.
it's
I'm gonna add that to my
such a
list.
it's such a unique haunted house story that also pays off, and it's kind of almost like three little novellas that are connected, and then it totally pays off in the end, just
Awesome.
about this. But it's a haunted house story set in this very modern brand new house, and
Ooh,
it in some ways is everything Gothic isn't.
yeah.
It's this house should not be haunted. The things that are happening in this house should not be happening because it's new construction. It's in this beautiful neighborhood, and there's it was one of the really only stories I've ever read like that, where it was such a fascinating way to tackle a haunted house story where your instinct, even when I wrote Kill Creek and stuff, is to go, what's the history of this house? It's been there a while and something bad happened. And here's a house they just built and you're the first people in it. And it shouldn't be haunted. It's not built on anything weird. There's no reason for it to be this way.
Ooh, I
And
like
it's
that a
very
lot.
surreal. It's very surreal. It's sort of things happen that could be supernatural. You can also argue that the whole book, there's nothing supernatural in it. And I will say one of my all-time favorites is House of Leaves, uh, which
I
House
love
of
that book.
Leaves was such a journey and such a fun puzzle. And it was the only book because very rarely does a movie or book scare me, and it can really enjoy it, but rarely do I go, oh my God, that was like really got under my skin.
Hmm.
And for some reason, House of Leaves, where almost nothing is shown, I don't think anything is shown. It's sounds, it's the sense of like going down into a staircase into uh, an endless abyss, and
Nothing.
am I
Yeah.
going to be able to get back? It really got under my skin. It really creeped me out.
House of Leaves is a weird book because every time I read it, I feel like it starts to seep off the page and into my life in some way. It feels like it
Yeah,
infiltrates you. It's such a good book. Yeah, love that. Those are three really great choices, and I don't think that I mean, Ghost Story, solid classic recommendation, but House of Leaves was not on my radar for that answer, and I'm so glad you mentioned it because that is like one of my favorite all-time novels.
yeah.
Speaking of all-time favorites, since we do a lot of horror movie reviews as well as book reviews, but since we do a lot of horror movie reviews, what is your favorite horror movie of all time? And you can give me multiple. We're not limiting it to one, but yeah.
I'm gonna be pretty shallow in my picks because I can't argue with a classic. It just I love The Shining. Um, I showed that to my kids when they were a little too young to see The Shining. They loved it. And it was so funny. They were like, that wasn't scary. And I was like, are you kidding me? When I was a kid, that freaked me out. Um, I love The Exorcist because it's just such a, it's a really, it's to for a movie about the devil, and it seems like when you're watching it, you're afraid that that you're allowing evil, you're inviting evil into your house, but it's really a story about faith. It's
Mm.
a story about faith reclaimed at the end, and the power of faith and the power of sacrifice. It's a very profound movie that most people only remember for head spinning and pea soup puking. And then another two movies that are just like when I saw them, they blew my mind. Evil Dead 2, obviously. I when I saw that as a kid, I was like, I this must have been so much fun to make. Making movies must be fun. And then Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Toby Hooper's
Oh
Texas
yeah.
Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is just bonkers. And
Yeah.
even though the original is a classic, it's amazing. It's one of those movies that you watch and it's different every time. The original you watch and it's horrifying, and then it's funny, and then it's like you realize the technical aspect of it and how incredible it is. It's just a different movie every time. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is just like a fever dream. It's bonkers. I mean, Dennis
Yeah.
Hopper with two chainsaws, and it's such a great movie.
Bill Moseley, yeah, no, hands down, fantastic film. And I'm always surprised. I'm so glad you mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the how funny it is, because I'm always shocked when I rewatch it how
Yeah.
much the cook is just unhinged and
Oh, yeah.
hilarious. Yeah, fantastic, fantastic choices. I love campy horror as well. It's something we haven't talked about. I think you nailed it with Evil Dead 2 and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So, as we wrap up here, where can people find you on social media if they want to stay abreast of your upcoming projects?
I'm pretty bad at it. I No, I think I'm probably most active on Instagram, and it's Scott Thomas Cares About You, which I didn't name. My A friend of mine, Ben Schwartz, who we did a show, an animated show with back in the day. I had just gotten on Instagram, and he was like, "That's not a good name," and he took my phone and he named it Scott Thomas Cares About You. So that's it's still that. Uh, and then on Twitter. It's Ninja Whenever, which is two of the shows that of Disney shows actually that the first two that I did. One was an animated show called Randy Cunningham Ninth Grade Ninja, and the other was called Best Friends Whenever, and so it's Ninja Whenever. And then I think there's a website that Scott Thomas writes, and so and then my books are at Barnes and Noble, they're on Amazon, they're on my publisher's website, Inkshares. So really, you can kind of find them pretty much anywhere.
That's awesome. We'll put all of that in the episode description so people can follow you and purchase these books, which we highly recommend here at Dread Alert Media. Honestly, Kill Creek was a wild ride, and Midwestern Gothic, like I've already gushed. So, um,
I
what are you
appreciate it.
working on? Are you working on anything next? Anything coming up?
I am. I just wrote a feature, spec feature that is um, was sort of inspired by my kids when they were little. That I took one of their sort of childhood games and made it weird and awful. Uh, and then uh, and then I'm currently writing. I'm about 150 pages into a sequel to Kill Creek, and so that is supposed to come out next fall.
I'm here for that for sure. That's fantastic. Scott, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're very busy. I know you have a number of different irons in the fire and a number of different projects you're working on. The fact that you spent some time with us today and we went over the time I promised you means the world to me and to our listeners. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
As always, stay spooky, my friends.